the fact that there is an enemy who is out to take us out has been such a constant reality for us. And then I have to go and write the I Will Be Here song out of a desire to say, look, if everything else crashes and burns, we want to finish this journey together. And the nights I've had to walk on stage and sing that song, knowing that my wife would rather be in any planet other than the one that I exist in. And, that's not just kind of being funny and cute. That is how it really feels.
You're listening to The Glass House, a podcast that focuses on ministry leaders and their spouses.
Ben and I have lived in that glass house for most of our married lives, and it's important to us that we bring you tools that we wish we had. But not only that, we would love to hear from you. Email us at president@lifeway.com. We would love to hear your stories from the Glass House.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Glass House. In this episode, we have Stephen Curtis Chapman and his wife Mary Beth, and they're going to be talking about some very relevant subjects. People assume that those who are in the public eye are not lonely. Stephen talks about how lonely he has felt over the years, as well as, how Mary Beth has felt being in the public eye. And then they also talk about trauma. Most people know the story of the loss of their daughter Maria and how difficult that has been for their family to work through, and then for him to continue to be a songwriter, a Dove Award-winning personality. All that's happening while the world's watching.
They talk about loneliness in the Glass House and how people assume that they would have lots of friends, but often that's not true. And I know that there's so many ministry leaders out there that can relate to that as well. And then lastly, we just talked about one of the most interesting points for me was how Mary Beth discussed the imposter syndrome. She experiences that with Stephen's popularity as it began to grow, and even currently, of how hard it is to be married to him and not feel like she is the right person married to him. And I understand that. I know that has been the case for myself as well and many friends. So it was endearing to me to hear her discuss that.
So if you've never been lonely, you've never had to deal with sadness, and you've never felt like you're an ill-fitted person for the role, don't listen to this episode. But if any of those things resonate with you, you're going to be challenged and encouraged by this very honest, very vulnerable conversation with Stephen Curtis Chapman and Mary Beth.
Lindley, I feel so honored with our guest today. You know how much I'm excited about.
I knew you were
going
to be super excited today.
Today we have Stephen and Mary Beth Chapman in the house, right here live, to have an interview about what it's been like to live out in the open, which is really the whole theme of our podcast.
Yeah. I mean, in your Glass House, what has that been like?
And I think people look at pastors and ministry leaders and they wonder, what's it like to walk into a restaurant, everybody knows you, everybody expects you to stop and say hi. I can only imagine what that's been like for the two of you. So let's just jump right in here. For you two, when was the time where you can start to remember where, okay, people are really paying attention to us, and maybe you feel like you better be on your best behavior? When did that start?
Yeah. I get asked sometimes, what's the one question you've never been asked? And you may have just tapped it. You may have just won the award for the one question after all these years.
Either that or you don't remember because we're kidding. Or
it may be that I don't remember, and I've been asked it many times. But that's a great question, because ours, like a lot of people, I guess, but particularly it was a very slow burn, slow build. It wasn't, out of the gate where we had, suddenly this, my first recording was very humble kind of success, I think it's safe to say, but it gave me enough, sort of
to make the next one.
To make the next one. The record company said, "Hey, there's enough here that we'll make another record," and that did pretty well. We'll make another record. In the beginning, we laugh, and I do, and say, people couldn't figure out if I was one or two people. People thought I was a duo because they would hear, "Hey, that's a new song by Stephen Curtis Chapman." And they heard Steve and Curtis Chapman. So I literally had people go, "Are you Steve or Curtis? Which one are you?" So, when you start out there, you don't, it's kind of, it's humbling. I remember going to my first, it's funny sitting here doing an interview like this and having cameras. I went to do a videotaping somewhere, and it was in Canada, actually, and I just won a Dove Award the night before. I think it might have been the first time I had won Artist of the Year Dove Award. And so in that room, in that moment, that's a big accomplishment, a lot of excitement. Record labels excited. We're excited. It's thrilling. And I literally walked in the very next morning. I got on a plane, flew to do this television interview, and I'm standing kind of over on the side, and a guy comes over and says, "Hey, where are the mic cables here? Because I'm not sure." And I'm trying to figure out. I'm new, and he thought I was working there, And so those kinds of moments that are very good for humbling you to go,
yes.
Yeah, nobody here knows who I am. But obviously over time that did begin to change. And I would say probably around the time, particularly with like the release of The Great Adventure. That was kind of the record and the recording and the label involvement that sort of kind of began to take off, a bit of the launching pad with that recording, and where, people started to become definitely more familiar. I think the song, I Will Be Here certainly started to do that, but even that was more of we know that guy's voice, we know that song, but for them to recognize us as a couple and that to begin impacting when we walked into a room, maybe.
I have a good friend. She has become a good friend, but when they first moved to Nashville, they were attending Christ Community, which is our home church, for a while, and she said, "I remember the first time I saw you and Stephen." There was a kerfuffle in the back of the church, and Stephen had Caleb and Will outside in the narthex, and you were getting on them pretty good about not doing something right. I don't know, probably not taking their sermon notes correctly or whatever. But I remember her telling me that after I met her, and I thought she definitely noticed. It was definitely Stephen, and it was like, oh, people are definitely watching.
Let me ask this, because many of our listeners are platform leaders, or they're up on the stage on Sunday and everybody knows them, but they don't know everybody in the church.
Yeah.
And it can be hard when you feel like you want some level of privacy, you want some level, like you have your own issues you're working out, and people want to continue to pry into your personal life. How has that been over the years? Maybe that's still going on. You guys are getting used to that, but just people wanting to have an opinion about your life, how you parent, how you do marriage, what you purchase and don't purchase, where you live or don't live, where your kids go to school. How have you dealt with all that?
Terribly,
Yeah.
Well, that's the right answer.
Yeah, terribly, and still trying to figure it out.
Still learning.
Gosh, we're human, right? And so we're affected by people's words. And so while we try not to see what people say or write, there's always comments, or there's must be nice to, blah, 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 or whatever. And they don't live our life, right? And they don't know the decisions we've made, whether it pertains to our children or, our life, our lifestyle, all of those things. So it's a struggle for me in particularly. I care deeply about what people think, probably to a fault of my husband, of me, of our children. And yet it's a very lonely place to be, because to your point, people do want to pry, or they want to know more and more. But where are the people who really want to know Stephen and I for Stephen and I, not for Stephen and I, the person who have these accolades or has written these songs or can gain something or not? Like, where are the people? Where are I call them our 2 a.m. friends? Where are the people who really just want to be with us and in relationship with us when and if nothing were this public piece of us. So that's
a really good answer.
It's just really hard, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think this is why you guys relate to the topic of the glass house so much, because what you're saying is also how pastors and ministry families feel, because like your story about the kids fussing. Well, that's so normal. I mean,
so normal.
And every other person that has a 4-year-old there who wants to lay down on the floor and have a temper tantrum, that's fine. But when it's a pastor's kid, someone like you guys' child, then it's noticed. And that's what's been so hard about for us in pastoral ministry, but then also, I mean, that's what we're trying to expose.
And it's opinions that are coming from way outside, and that perpetuates the loneliness that you feel too, because you feel like I'm being watched by a bunch of people who really have nothing to do with my life. But then sometimes the people that should be or want to be the closest to you, they also kind of back away a little bit, because they think, from one avenue this way, oh, they're really busy, I'll just leave them alone. And these people over here going, they're really busy, we'll leave them alone. And then sometimes literally Steve and I are sitting at home going, where's everybody at? Like everybody thinks we have this crazy busy life, so everybody's leaving us alone. And it's like, where are our people? Where are our people that are really going to be there? And the case in point, where did our community go? Because we're up here, but we're not. Where's the micro piece?
Yeah.
And a lot of those people that would be close in, like I said, would be those people, but they also think we're so busy that they're trying to do us a favor by not engaging, and so then we end up pretty lonely.
Yeah.
I think that is so interesting because people think that we experienced that this year at Christmas time because Christmas parties and things began back again. And because we're not in a church currently in this setting, people all the time would say, "Oh, we had this party, but we know how busy you are."
Yeah.
And so
Ding, 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 ding. It's like, really?
Oh,
Because
we would have loved to come. I mean, but that's
You
okay.
don't actually know how busy we are.
Yes. And so, I mean, we are in a different stage because of our kids, but still,
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been so fun to be invited. I mean, I think that's the thing too, like to feel included and to feel invited is really important.
And some of it's not their fault. Like even with you guys, you don't know this, but we really care about you all. When your book came out, Choosing to See, Lindley and I read it page by page together out loud. And there was a moment where we just sat there and wept. We felt like we were a part of the Chapman family. I mean, your music has meant so much to us. It's on playing almost every week in our house. And yet there's been times, like last time we were together, we talked about getting for dinner. And many times I've thought, they're busy. They don't have time for that. So we've been a part of that too.
Yeah.
And that's the way people who I think are, whether it's celebrity or popularity, there's a sense that they've got all the relationships they want. And they must be so happy with that.
Yeah.
And it's really not true.
it's not true.
Ben, I thought one of the most interesting parts of this conversation was when they spoke of their loneliness. I think there's an assumption out there that because of who he is, they would never be lonely. They have friends just, beating down the door to hang out with them. And we even talked about how in your role as the president of Lifeway, there was a Christmas season where people would say to us, they'd send us a text like, we had this great Christmas party, but we didn't invite you because we knew you guys were so busy. Well, really, we were like, we would have loved to come. I mean, we weren't that busy. And so, I mean, what did you think about that part?
Well, a couple things there. Number one, I always loved it when people would say, hey, we're having a party on Saturday. Would love for you and Lindley to come. No pressure if you don't come. But it felt great to be invited, but not to be expected to show up. And a lot of times we would go. But I never liked it when people were like, hey, we have a party Saturday at 8:00. Can you be there? Well, I feel put on the spot. And as a pastor, I would have to say yes. But I did resonate with what Stephen was saying in terms of, like, it is nice to know you're invited and to be included. On another side, though, is what people don't understand about those in ministry in a public area is that it's different to have acquaintances than it is soul friends. A lot of people know who I am, but they don't know me. They don't know much about me at all. They don't know me like you know me or the kids know me. So I have a desire, just like everybody else, to have a few people in my life who deeply care and know me. And that doesn't mean that they just can recognize me as I walk through a restaurant. So it's preposterous to think that Stephen Curtis Chapman and Mary Beth Chapman never get lonely because they're well-known people. And that's part of living in the glass house, is managing this perception of everybody knows who I am, but I don't know who they are. And to be honest, they don't really know who I am.
Right.
How do you feel about it?
I think that's hard. I mean, what you're saying, I totally resonate with, but this goes back to that safe people picker, and it is hard to know who to trust. And so I think sometimes we make ourselves lonely. We isolate ourselves out of fear or perhaps hurt in the past. I just think it's an interesting topic. I don't have an answer for this, but I just was so surprised when they said that. And that's coming from me. We've had seasons of loneliness, and even us we think they would never be lonely. And so I think it made me consider the fact that there are so many lonely people out there, that we talk about Christianity as loving people. And how can we do that better? Because clearly from the top to the bottom, people are lonely.
And you can be in a crowded room and feel completely alone. You can be the person on stage leading the song and everybody's listening to you and feel completely alone. I've been that as a preacher. And there have been Sundays where I felt super lonely.
Right.
And nobody knew it. So I think it was good that he called that out. Also want to say, going back to our passion of building relationships with non-religious people, when we lived in Denver and were surrounded by so many non-religious people, there was it's weird saying this, but I felt more known by my non-religious friends than I did by my church friends, because my non-religious friends were the people I just hung out in the street with a t-shirt and jeans, and we talked about our kids, our private lives. So again, there's value of having people in your life who aren't necessarily connected to your life in the church. We think about, we're blessing them by being a part of their lives, bringing Christian influence, but it's reciprocal.
Well, I don't even think it goes religious versus non-religious. I just think we all need friends who aren't directly involved in our job. I mean, they can be really great Christian people who go to a different church. Like, that's fine too. Just that you can have conversation with, and not, did you hear what happened to so-and-so? We should pray for them kind of conversations.
I continue to say it this way. If I don't have some friends in my life that if I say, hey, I'm resigning my current job, they'd be like, cool, so what are we doing next weekend? Like, I think everybody needs people who aren't attached to them because of anything they do at their job. They just are friends. Mm-hmm. And that brings us security to our lives. And I can only imagine how difficult that is for someone like Stephen Curtis and Mary Beth to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Lifeway just came out with this greatest needs study, surveyed 1,000 pastors. 69% said that they see a need to invest in personal relationships, personal friendships. I mean, almost 70%, 7 out of 10 pastors say, I could really use some friends. Mm-hmm. That's eye-opening.
The other ones aren't telling the truth.
And 30% are lying. Well, I think it just is indicative of where we are as a culture, that popularity and fame and celebrity are confused as satisfaction in life or depth of relationships. Those two do not always go together. In fact, it seems the opposite. Mm-hmm. The more well-known you are, the more difficult it is to have real, authentic relationships. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some hard stuff. One of the things that has been unique about you all is your vulnerability around pain and grief. Lindley and I have been on a counseling journey since we came to Nashville, and processing sadness in our life has been something we've been learning. I'm particularly bad at that. What has it been like to walk through grief in the public eye? What has that been like?
Well, again, my wife would answer probably
terrible. Terrible. But
the answer to all of the questions, terrible. No, and it is hard. I mean, because there's that part of both of us that will say, and this is sort of a blanket statement for us, that, there's a big part of you that it's hard to even sometimes be honest, because people would be looking, going, now this is aside from the, unthinkable loss of our daughter, but just in general, our life would be like, call an ambulance. Like, you guys really, it's going to be, you're lonely. Must be so hard to be those kinds of thoughts. And you feel those even when you think, if I really voice this, people are going to go, really? That,
yeah.
I wish I had your really hard, lonely life, because it looks from the outside. And that then plays into even more the isolation, because then you think, you do a lot of, what our pastor calls holy should,
shoulding on yourself.
Yeah, I should
not
do this. I should not do that. So, that is I think a part of the, even sort of digs the hole a little deeper in ways. And so, when we answer these questions, it's been terrible. There's that part of, me again, and I think both of us, it's like, well, let me qualify it. We did make a decision very, very early on with letting our family, all of our kids in particular, because of the nature of our, specific grief and loss of our daughter, it was extremely important that we allow our children to, voice their wishes and what they felt in terms of how we were going to steward this. Were we going to go completely private? Were we going to just shut ourselves down? Because if that's what we needed to do for the sake of our kids, then that's what we would do. And it was really a decision made, particularly, by our children and our son, and especially who said, this is how, in so many words, he might not have used these exact words, but it was really what we came to understand is this is part of the story that we've been entrusted with to steward this side of heaven. And if we believe the story is not over yet, that this is, where we are now, but to honor both Maria's life and the loss and the pain, and to make sense of this, to see God bring purpose out of this, then we're going to step into that, knowing it's going to be harder than we probably even imagine. I remember one of the first prayers that someone prayed for us that was such a gift, and we didn't understand it at the time, and we totally understand it now. And I've actually prayed it for many other people and have passed it on, is like, God, give this family grace when really well-meaning people say really stupid things, because that's going to be probably one of the hardest parts of the journey, will be when people who really mean well will say things that are really miss the mark and really, in fact, hurt more than they help, and all of those kind of things. That's part of the, trying to steward that in a way to say, we're going to step into this and go take the Larry King Live interviews and the things like that, and I mean, and I'm sure many people had plenty of different opinions about how even we handled that. And that was, again, one of those where we just had to say, God, is as best as we can, we're going to try to steward this in a way that we believe as a family is going to actually be a part of the very healing that we need, is going to be by us telling the story of why we believe this is not the end of the story, why this is not, going to destroy us, and holding on to that.
I think as you move through that grief, again, we made a decision as a family, and particularly driven by our son, to say, what do you want to do? What do you not want to do? We gathered together as a family that day. I put this vase in a bag, and we stood around and we threw it on the ground, and I meant that, God was going to glue us back together, and we were going to walk differently. We were going to have holes and leaks, but that God was going to heal us and then help shepherd our story. But I threw it a little too hard, and it turned into a big pile of dust. And so I was like, well, it was representative of where we were at the time. So it was irreparable, but hopefully, and yes, we have moved through some of that. But the reason I tried to be as honest as I could in the book Choosing to See was, I don't want people from a distance looking at us like, this terrible thing happened, but look how great they are now. I still want them to know it's a really hard story to shepherd, and God has so shown us the wholeness in the land of the living. He has held our son. He has brought. We're still looking for the wings on our daughter-in-law who was brought to him after the accident. He has shown over and over again that he has carried us through the story, but there's this huge Maria-sized hole in our heart, and that still means deep nights of sorrow and tears. And it is still the trauma of that with my daughters that they're working through, and our family that are working through it. I mean, it was a huge rupture, a huge thing that we are continuing to continue to walk in and and live with. It doesn't go away. It's and because there are people out there who have lost children, lost loved ones, are agonizing over whatever their loss is, their grief, their sickness, their illness, and I want them to know that we still carry that with us. And yet God has provided along the way, and we can point to places where he has shown up. And it doesn't mean that it is all okay now and better, but that he continues to show us his goodness and the land of the living.
Can I ask a question about it from just the mom to mom portion of that? Is that people who lose children, typically they don't have another son who was involved in it. And so I think the question is, one of my very best friends has buried 2 children, but it was natural things that happened. But how do you navigate that when the anniversary or her birthday probably deeply grieves your son? I mean, the emotional balance there.
Yeah.
I mean, because you don't want to bring it up for him again.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's the situation that I think people are so curious about, you guys, because it's such a harder thing to navigate.
Yeah. Well, Will Franklin is a special young man, and he's my warrior and he's my hero. I would give anything for this not to be a story. When we had amazing, from the get-go, our pastor got us with some amazing, it's the people you never want to meet, the great therapists and counselors that are going to walk. I'm still really good friends with a lot of them. I mean, Steve and I are pretty much habitual counselor users, but
So are we.
Yeah.
We're learning
We're big
this.
supporters of it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we've built wings onto most counselors' offices in this town. But the people that walked closely with us, I had, especially with the girls, the other two, the Joey and Stevie Joy and Will Franklin, just one of the counselors really helped me understand, and it was hard to hear, but Maria didn't live a short life. She lived a full life, and she's fully alive with Jesus. And there's nothing we can do other than celebrate that she's there. I now walk the rest of this dash, or this, time between here and seeing Maria again with my son, and how do I love him and help him heal. And so from the get-go, my focus was, it was like a bomb that went off, because we all had shrapnel because we were all there that day, but obviously my son. And so we've really focused on helping him heal and move forward. And then as time has passed, we kind of let everybody grieve in their own ways. Those first several years, we were always together on her homegoing day, on her going to heaven day. But, that gets hard. You're right. That gets hard. And so he needs to be able to grieve that and think about that in his own way. It started to shift from being a day that we gathered at the cemetery to maybe doing more things as a family to celebrate that the enemy didn't win. And that's what we decided at the very beginning. No matter what has to happen, no matter how private or public this needs to be, no matter what we need to give up or what we need to do, we will not let our family implode. And that has been something we have fought hard for, and it's put a few more wrinkles, I think, on us. He knows that as a mom, I'm still going to post a picture and say, miss this girl on her, what would be her 17th birthday. I know that's hard for him, but he also respects it. And yet he does too, in his own way, celebrates her. Same with her homegoing day.
Did he ever feel like you were angry with him?
If he were here, I would say he would say no. I'm sure he felt shame and all of the things that a young man would. But I mean, I remember that day, and you just rolled down the window, and the last thing you said to him driving down the driveway was, your father loves you. And he and I sat and had a conversation that I'll never forget. He and I at the cemetery, and I love that young man. He is. And his older brother and sister, they rallied.
I think what's difficult about the human condition is it doesn't matter how much money you have or how well known you are. Human beings are human beings, and our pain is our pain. And everybody's carrying burdens and has a battle going on. And from the highest to the lowest. And so the common ground that we find in the gospel is that everybody's broken, everybody's struggling, and trying to figure out how to have hope in the midst of brokenness. I want to stop right there and talk about calling the wambulance. I love, first of all, that he said that. Second of all, I have felt that way as a pastor, in that my job is to carry other people's burdens and talk about their problems. It feels weird and selfish for me to talk about my problems, because I feel like, well, compared to other people in the church and what I know is going on here, I mean, there's Jim, his wife's dying of cancer, or there's, Bob, whose son is on this horrible prodigal journey. Like, am I really going to complain about the fact that my car broke down on the side of the road and I've got to go find another vehicle? Those kind of problems feel like I can't complain about everyday problems.
There are lots of pastors and ministry leaders out there who are having the same situation. They do have a wife that's, on her deathbed, or they've lost a son. I mean, we interviewed the Reeds about losing their son, Caleb, and who do they get to talk to? I mean, I don't want to trivialize it because of the situation that we're in. I mean, I want to think of the people out there who who do need to call the ambulance. I mean, who it's not even whining. It's just, if we don't want to be lonely, we have to be just deep.
If I was a pastor going through a life crisis like you just described, I would constantly be asking the question, how many times can I talk about this before people are worn out from hearing it? It feels weird to not mention this in a sermon as I'm talking through Job. But at the same time, if every Sunday is me talking about the challenges of the sorrow I'm bearing, I don't want to be a burden on people. So I think what happens is many public people they don't talk about it at all in fear of wearing people out. So they never get a chance to speak their burdens. And that's what alleviates a lot of the pain, is just speaking it.
So what's the difference in whining and sharing?
That's a good question. You mentioned safe people picker before. I think that comes from a previous episode where Adam Mason said one of the ways that they diagnose emotional health is how well does this person do at picking safe people? And I do think pastors need some counsel and encouragement, and wives, about how open they are with their problems and with whom. And it's always it's an art and not a science. If you're too guarded, you're plastic and you're not real. But if you're too open, you're susceptible to getting really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Last time we were together pre-COVID, it was another world back there. You guys were really authentic about some of the challenges of being married in the glass house. Even mentioning, like you just did, counselors.
It's challenging being married in a regular house.
Yes.
Let alone
the glass
your
house.
And we went through a really rough time in our marriage, which we shared in episode 1. It really helped us realize that everybody goes through in marriage, particularly when you're in unique seasons of change, trauma. And Stephen, you said, you don't know how hard it is to be the guy who wrote, "I Will Be Here."
Yeah.
Everybody assumes you're the model husband.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when you said that, I'm like, I wonder how many people would be shocked if Stephen Curtis was in marriage counseling. You know?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about just how has your marriage gone through ups and downs in such a public world? What's that been like through all the seasons? Like, how would you summarize that? Because your two personalities are very different. I can tell that right now.
Well, we learned that. So our first marriage counselor, so that's really for us, first of many. And I mean, this is all so very true. I mean, we began, I mean, some of you know, same last name when we met, our mailbox in college, and she was Beth Chapman when I met her, and everybody always laughs. Was that weird? And I always use I'm from Kentucky, so it wasn't that unusual, but it was not. It was not expected. But we did get married. I think very foolishly thinking. I mean, we were very foolish in all of our thinking at that point. I think just about everything. In
Well,
life,
I was
but we were
19, so
young.
that says a lot.
She was 19. I was 21. How much could we have known about anything? And we thought, gosh, this is just, we're so perfect for each other, as every, probably young couple does. We were just a match made in heaven if there ever was one. And it literally was, we were driving back from Springfield, Ohio, where we got married. Our honeymoon was a night in a hotel in Cincinnati, Ohio, because I'd be back to school. She was working in Nashville. I was going to Belmont. Had to be back on Monday, so we got married on Saturday. Sunday was basically our honeymoon. We went to the Cincinnati Zoo and drove around, and it was raining, and all the animals were not even out, so we couldn't even see anything. I mean, it was not the way you want to start happily ever after. And we're driving back in her green Ford Pinto from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I look over and she's got tears streaming down her face. Again, not the way you expect to start off, your blissful, married life. And I'm freaking out, thinking, what did I do? What's wrong? And it wasn't the first time we had encountered, a struggle, but it was definitely for us just a complete crash into the wall of reality of, this is going to be a lot harder than we thought. And so it was a few years in.
I think it was, hey, this is going to be a long life.
This is going to be a very long life. It was early in it was 4 or 5 years into our marriage. And again, I've shared a lot of this in different forms and, articles and interviews and book. But my parents went through a divorce, which was a really devastating thing because we had both of our parents were, in our eyes, had their brokenness and their stuff, but they were just, man, if we can just do it like them. My parents were a little more vocal and upfront about their faith and the importance of faith in their relationship because they started very early and had struggled, and God just, brought them together. And that was just the story of the life I grew up in. Man, God put Jesus in the center of your marriage. Divorce is never even a word in your vocabulary. And then suddenly my parents were divorced. So it was a word in our vocabulary that I'd never been trained how to even think about or prepare for. And so then suddenly we're looking at each other going, there's a lot of brokenness here and struggle. And we were kind of chanting the mantra, divorce is not even a word in our vocabulary. And suddenly I think there was panic in both of our eyes going,
panic.
Wait a minute, just saying that obviously doesn't make it so. And so we sought out our first counselor, and he was the first to identify, I think, that there was he did some kind of a chart of personalities.
No, he did a test.
And it was but it was a test, but he ended up putting it on a chart. And like yours going this way up and mine was going like down. Anyway, they formed an X. The two, if you lay them over top of each other, he was like, this is going to be a problem. You guys, there's X marks the spot. There's a reason here. And it would be our pastor, Scotty Smith, and dear friend who's walked through so much of life with us, that we sat with early on as well to just receive some counsel. And he said, and he was the one who kind of put it a little different spin and said, knowing you guys as I'm learning to know you, it's like Tigger and Eeyore got married. And that's going to be a challenge because you got Mr. Bouncy, energy, fun, and you've got, melancholy, and Mary Beth and the way of processing life. And just so we began to realize real quickly that a lot of it, was just personality difference. Then, and you guys know this, and it's the reason I really believe that particularly this podcast and what you guys are doing is so important and so probably so needed, and so people that are hearing it, that are in ministry, are so grateful that you guys are doing this, is because, we know there's no question. We say it over and over again. We've realized it early on, is that there really is an enemy who hates anything that reflects the beauty of God's heart, and nothing does that like marriage. It's the thing that God created to give us the world, His creation, the picture of His relationship, with the church and everything about it. So if there's one thing that the enemy's going to try to destroy and take down, it's going to be, a marriage, especially one that's trying to honor God and trying to walk, in a place of we really want to honor each other and live in some way that's going to reflect the glory of God in our relationship and our marriage. And so the fact that there is an enemy who is out to take us out has been such a constant reality for us. And then I have to go and write the I Will Be Here song out of a desire to say, look, if everything else crashes and burns, we want to finish this journey together. And the nights I've had to walk on stage and sing that song, knowing that my wife would rather be in any planet other than the one that I exist in. And, that's not just kind of being funny and cute. That is how it really feels, and how, and even saying, and that's the thing we have been tried to be fiercely committed to, because the shame that comes on top of all of that is that not only, no matter how honest you try to be about the reality that, I've said it probably 95% of the times I've sung that song, I just feel compelled to say, don't misunderstand when you hear this song that, boy, if we just had marriage like those guys did, because we've all done it. I've read the, Jim Dobson books and gone, gosh, if we could just do it like those guys, we'd, and then you set yourself up for this unreasonable, this hope, and then it doesn't happen, and then you get hopeless because you go, well, maybe we're just too broken. Maybe we're just not, And so all those things are, again, I believe, all things that the enemy uses to kind of little lies and whispers to go, yeah, you're beyond, you're beyond hope in this situation.
When Stephen talks about being the I will be here guy, I can only imagine there's pastors out there that think about, I just preached a marriage series or a family series. If they only knew the week at my house and how cold and icy it's been under my roof. Because marriage has ups and downs. We're all humans. Our marriages are human. We have weeks where we really do well at loving each other, and there's weeks where we can't seem to say a kind word to one another. And yet I'm coming up on Sunday on session 4 of the family series. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. And that just happens to be the topic, you know? So I think I relate to what he's saying in terms of one of the challenges of being the glass house is there's a perception of you've got it all together and you stand up there and you think, well, I'm a faker. I'm a total faker. And that kills the soul.
I think I just appreciated what he said as far as being that guy, because I think this happens with pastors who write books about marriage, the pastors who are out there who write books about parenting, and then their children go wayward or whatever. I mean, so for me, when I'm sitting out there and you're preaching a sermon on the marriage or family, and I know some arguments we'd had that week, it was hard for me to be gracious.
True story. We were recently walking around our neighborhood. We had AirPods in our ears listening to our own podcast. And I was deeply convicted by the very things we were talking about that we had not practiced that week. That's reality for somebody who teaches the Bible, is that this very thing we proclaim, and proclaim with boldness, we have such a difficult time practicing it on a regular basis. I mean, I can preach a sermon on forgiveness all day long, but when you say something that really hurts my feelings, it takes me a while to really forgive. So the challenge of being in the glass house is we are called to proclaim this grace that we all are supposed to live by, and yet we're struggling to live by it ourselves. He writes the song, I Will Be Here, and yet has days when he wonders if she's still going to be there. Nights when he steps out on the platform and knows my wife cannot stand me right now, and I'm about to sing, I Will Be Here. That is very hard on the soul. And we think about public figures having these beautiful, wonderful lives. That's very hard.
One of our favorite stories early in ministry when I was a pastor at a church is they had one of those parents' night out deals where you drop your kids off and then you go out to eat and come back later. And we were so excited to have a night without the kids. And we got into the car and started to debate where we were going to go eat. I don't know what happened, but we were absolutely within seconds screaming at each other.
Screaming.
Angry, rage.
Yeah.
We show up at this Chinese
I'm
restaurant.
Crying. I'm like crying, and I'm not normally a crier. I'm mad. I mean, like, I'm just going to get mad and louder. And I was so mad that I was crying. And we show up.
You look like an 80s rocker. I mean, it was all coming down. And half the church is there. And
we decided, we were like, we'll go to this Chinese buffet because nobody will be there.
And half the church was there.
And then they were all there.
And they could tell they're not jiving. Something happened. And I remember feeling like really exposed.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
man,
we're fine.
It's one thing for us to have a blow up in our home, but now we're going to have to deal with everybody knowing that we got stuff. Mm-hmm.
But I think that was a different era. We wouldn't be like that now. I mean, I think we were pretending and wanted to have this facade like, oh, we've got it all together. And I mean, the heart of the glass house is because we thought, even for probably 17, 18 years, that we were not going to have serious problems. And we got to a place of, are we going to make it? I mean, I don't even know if we're going to make it, kind of thing. And so out of that, then counseling journey, even in that, the things we went for a year, and then we're like, we've got this, like, we're good. And of course, a couple months later, we called our guy back and we're like, we need to get back on the schedule because
that's super familiar.
Yes. I mean, but now if that story happened, we'd go in and be like, we're fighting. Like, we're just fighting. And
But
pray for us.
it is what it is, you know.
What we're learning is the more people talk out loud about this who are supposed to have great marriages, I think the more people feel less alone.
Yes.
Of just, okay, this is hard for everybody. Marriage, no matter who you marry, it's a challenge because you're two different people trying to live out the same thing. So let's turn this conversation into a little bit of, like, I'm sure at this point you guys feel like you have some role in mentoring younger people, what you've been through. So let's take the grief side first, and then we'll come back to the marriage side.
Okay.
But as you maybe picture out there a pastor and his wife who have lost a child, and now they're being called to pastor a church through the midst of that, what would you do to encourage them to say, here's the next step you might take toward healing, how would you encourage someone walking through grief in the public eye?
I think grief, it's so individualized, right? The way you would respond to something's not going to be the way I would respond. Clearly, at the very beginning of our grief journey, one of the very first things Scotty told us was, 98% of most marriages don't survive the loss of a child. I'm like, not helpful right now, Scotty. But he had journeyed with us all the way up until that point too, knowing that, that we have been in, just, I call it preventative maintenance, marriage counseling, preventative maintenance. Just learning how to live with someone who's essentially different than you, and just choosing to stay in it and committed. And so the mentoring part would be, gosh, first of all, you need to take all the time you need. And I can speak. What was most helpful for me in the earliest days were people who would just come and sit and say nothing, because what do you say, right? And then what was next helpful was people who would speak from, here's my experience, but it's not going to be yours, because I don't want to come charging in and saying, well, here's, this, and this. And because it might have been helpful for me, but it might not be helpful for you. And so that is just what my advice would be, is just take all the time you need. And clearly, you don't have to pretend to say, I've got this all together, or I've got it figured out, or it's behind me, or we've moved on. Because there are times where I feel like I've been around people who are like, okay, it's long enough. Can you just get past the Maria thing? And boy, nothing will make me fighting mad like that, because it's like, no, I will not. Yes, this happened, and yes, God has been so gracious, but this is still our daughter, and this is still something I will walk with a limp until I see Jesus. And so
there have been people who have put an expiration date on it, like,
yeah,
you need to be done with this.
Yeah, it needs to, you need to be done with this now. It's time to. And they haven't said it, but you can feel it, right?
Yeah.
You feel it. You feel it. It's like, but at the same time, going back to that loneliness, you also don't want to be here come the sad people in the room again. It's just, it's all part of the, you become the
people that everybody kind of has that sad look, which is part of the reason we, struggle going to church, and when it's not because it's Stephen and Mary Beth Chapman, and they might want to ask us an adoption question, or they might want to ask me a music question, or it might be something. Then it becomes, gosh, it's so hard to just go be in that community when everybody's going to look and kind of have that sad look and that hard, oh man, it must be, and yeah, all of that.
All of it. So just as much as possible, get the truest, most authentic friends around you to allow you the space to take as long as you need, and then just start into that journey.
Good, really good. Part of the challenge is that we really need to be, you feel this need to be processing it, the best that anybody will, because you sing about, live out, talk about the hope that you have, the faith that you have, and so the expectation that you feel from without and the expectation from within, that we, we need to be better than we are.
You're a model.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think it was our son, Caleb. It was Caleb that he was talking about this in an interview that he did for his band, and the music that they do, and was being asked about his family. And he made this great quote that we have used often. And he says, my family, we walk with a limp, all of us, and as a family, but I think we hobble well. And
it was actually, I think it was a blog that he wrote on his parents.
Wow.
Actually, it was
we
like
hobble,
we hobble well.
And he said, I think my parents hobble well, and I thought, that is the reality. If we can, and that would be the encouragement to. And we all know it. It's all stuff that we know. But, when we wrestle, with God, and nothing will make us wrestle like grief and loss and trauma, because these things won't be answered. And I come from probably like all of you guys, and so many listening to this from a gospel that says God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. And when that plan, and I believe it's true, but wonderful plan is defined many different ways. And it's not defined in the way I grew up believing, singing the hymn, "Every day with Jesus is sweeter than the day before." And yet I'm going, this is turning out that every day is harder and harder to figure out, harder to understand this pain. What does it look like to live in that and not throw everything out the window and say, okay, it must all have been a bunch of baloney, because this is not the God that I was expecting God to be. And the last thing I guess I'd say in the words of, in way of just encouragement, would be, the Psalms became so much different to me in our journey, and have become, because I never saw the verses. I never realized, and it's not just one place where the psalmist says, "How long, God, are you going to forget me forever?" In so many words, saying, I feel like if you exist, I don't exist to you. I'm not on your radar. I feel desperate, I feel hopeless. But then to watch, and the way I sort of see it is, the psalmist takes a deep breath and says, "But God, I'm gonna trust you. Your love is better than life," and says these things that we write the songs about that sound like these, just wonderful declarations. And man, I wish I could have that feeling and hands in the air. And it's just such a wonderful, better is one day in your courts than 1,000 elsewhere. And I see everybody's around me singing and feeling this amazing, wonderful, euphoric feeling. And when I actually read it, I realize that's coming after saying, "How long are you going to forget me forever, God?" And those are all declarations of faith. I'm just gonna draw my anchor in this again, God, because I got nothing else. I'm just gonna keep dropping my anchor in your truth. And it's not one time, it's not one verse in Scripture of the Psalms. It's over and over again. It's this 3 steps forward and 2 steps, sometimes 20 steps back. It's like, wait a minute, I'm way further behind than I was before. But I'm just gonna keep trusting you, even when it makes no sense at all. I'm just going to keep trusting you, and I think that's what Caleb means by we hobble well.
And to tag on to that, from the perspective of marriage, there are days, probably more days for me, that I'm not seeing it. I don't even know if I believe it. I'm a skeptic at best, and he is that for me, because that's the mystery of marriage, is that we're together. And so when I can't believe it for myself, he's there, and he's going, "I believe it for you. I believe it for you. Come on." And hopefully there are those days when he doesn't believe it, that I'm going, come on. Because I am the glass half empty, he does a little more for me. But
it can
that's
go both ways.
But that's the beautiful the partnership in marriage, is that we have each other's back.
That's good. The most dangerous days in marriage are when you're both down.
That's exactly what I was getting ready. When you both can't see it, it's like,
scary. Get the kids.
Call the counselor.
Get about babysitter.
Yeah.
So the 2 questions that we ask at the end of every podcast guest is, what is the hardest thing about living in the glass house for you guys?
The first thing comes to mind, we've already said, is being the "I will be here" guy. Why in the heck did I have to write that song? No, I'm so thankful I wrote that song. And when I first recorded that song, I still remember my producer at the time, Phil Nash, saying, "Man, I bet this is going to get sung at a lot of weddings." And I was shocked. I looked at him and said, "You're crazy. Why would anybody want to sing this?" Because what the song represented to me was, number one, my mom and dad going through divorce, and then me looking at my wife saying, "Tomorrow, if you wake up and we don't feel anything, and we are completely clueless, and the sun does not appear, I will be here. If in the dark we lose sight of love, I want to be." I'm like, that is not the song you sing at weddings.
Ominous kind of tone.
You don't sing that. Yeah, you sing, "Endless Love" and songs that are all
which
happy
he has done before.
Which I have done before. But I'm like, nobody's done it. I'll be here when you feel like being quiet, when you're crying and the winning lose. I'm like, this is, but at the same time, it's being able to say, hey, this is the reality. I had no idea. And I've said this so many times to my wife, to counselors, to my audiences. I'm really thankful though, because that song has been such a great, accountability to. I sing it night after night, and I sort of have to hold myself back up under that. Okay, this is what you committed to. This is what you promised, what you said, regardless of what anybody else thinks or knows. This you've made these promises.
I think for me, it's the wondering or assuming what people might think about me, and then how I really view myself. I'm from Springfield, Ohio. My parents are still in the house. I was 10 months old when we moved there. So I love going home because it feels simple. And so I think one of the sweetest compliments anybody can give me is, you seem so normal. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, we don't know what normal is, because our normal is so odd. But I'm usually a no makeup, sweatshirt, 10-year-old pair of jeans kind of girl.
So in your heart, you long for just a simple life.
Yeah. And I kind of am that way around, I'm starting to worry about Williamson County. I'm like, do I have to dress up to go to the grocery store? I'm not going to dress up to go to the grocery store. I'm never going, Instacart.
They recently said they hate when Walmart doesn't have what they want because they have to go home and get dressed up and get a shower to go to Target to get it.
Yeah. It's like, oh no.
This is actually very new for me, because Colorado is not like that.
Okay, well, I'm Springfield, Ohio, so
okay,
yeah.
Yes.
So it's just I think that's the hardest thing, is that I don't think I'm what everybody thinks I am, but I love just being normal and me, and I wish everybody knew that, and I don't really know how to express that.
Well, and I think what you were getting ready to say, which is sort of I think that's the depth of that too. It goes very deep, because I remember years ago, even when I started, doing this, and I remember you really even grieving and very much wrestling with the fact that you said, I'm not the right person to be married to Stephen Curtis Chapman, of what people perceive. I'm not Ruth Graham, and of course I'm quick to say I'm not Billy Graham. And that has been a big part of, I think, both of our journey, but your journey, in particular too, of watching that and wrestling with, I'm not, it's the voice of shame in all of us. I'm not enough. I'm not enough for what this is that God has called me to. And I think that's for all of us to wrestle with.
So when Stephen was talking about Mary Beth grieving that she wasn't the right person to be married to himself, famous musician, I just related to that so much. In every season of our life, when you began as a college pastor, and then when you moved into senior roles, and then here even at Lifeway, every single time I've thought, I'm not the right person to be married to you. And so, I don't think this is even just stereotyped or typecast for a pastor's wife, because I've been now several different things, or a senior pastor's wife. I think it's ministry leaders' wives or spouses that feel like, I'm not the right person for this.
You did not have any idea what you were signing up for, and then you signed this covenant that says forever, and then I sneak in the back door. And by the way, I'm going to be a pastor, and you're going to be a pastor's wife, which means everyone's going to have an opinion about every decision you make. You good with that? And we don't
I'm not good with that.
We don't have even time to process that. I mean, God just throws that on us. And, it makes me wonder what Moses felt like in the Old Testament when God says, you're going to go and speak to Pharaoh. He said, I'm not a speaker. How many pastors' wives feel that way? Like, hey, you're going to go and help your husband lead this church. That's not what I'm signed up for. I'm not even cut out for that.
Well, and the expectations they feel coming into different places. Because you have to dance. You have to learn the dance of every new place you go, of what was the previous ministry spouse like? What are the expectations they have for you versus what you have on your own self? Whose feelings are you going to hurt if you come in and say, hey, this is what I'm actually called to do, but you actually have a person doing this, so how do we work together? I mean, there's just so much of that happens.
This comes back to the voice of shame that I've learned a lot about this year, which is always should language.
this is not just a pastor's wife problem. I feel constantly like you should not be in this room. You are not qualified for this. You're not cut out for this. You don't have the goods on this discussion. And yet God continues to thrust me into arenas where he's called me to be there and exercise leadership. And so what do we do when we find ourselves in a marriage? And I think to myself, I should be better for her. We want to run from the marriage. What do we do when we get called to ministry positions and the voice in my head says, you should be better? What do I want to do? I want to quit. So it feels like in that voice of shame that happens in ministry lives, it's really a death to self and a desire to follow God that keeps you there. Let me just flip the coin now. What's been the best part about living your life in the glass house? What's made it worth it?
Well, obviously, we have heard so many stories from so many couples in particular, that have said, thank you for your honesty. I mean, I've told her, and I don't say this, to try to come off as, oh, look, I'm just saying nice things about my wife. I come home every time since she wrote and shared her heart in her book that you guys mentioned, I've had every night multiple people come to me, ladies in particular, but couples that just say, Mary Beth's honesty, is something that so impacted me, gave me, I just helped me not feel so alone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the part for us. Obviously, we've had an incredible, for all the challenges that it is, we've had this amazing opportunity to be woven into the stories of so many other people and so many other marriages and families and adoption journeys and all of that are just incredible. It's an amazing gift.
It's good.
I would say the exact same thing. Just the people that we've met along the way, the stories over and over and over again of what his music has meant to their family, to their marriage, to their adoption stories, to their grief journey. All of that is just, it's super humbling. And again, being in the glass house, you go, oh, but you want to go, but if you only knew, but it is comforting, and it's just really sweet when you go, okay, maybe all the sleepless nights, maybe all the shoulding on ourselves, as Scotty says, all the questioning is worth it when, I got a letter just a few days ago of a little girl who had asked Jesus into her heart, very similar to the story in my book about Maria. And it's just when people take the time to just go, we've watched, now it's my grandchildren are listening to Stephen's music. That's always a good one. But, just the legacy of passing on the story and just how it's still impacting. So I will always be grateful.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to the show? It gives us insight into what you like, and it helps others find the show as well.
We'd also like your recommendations on what you want to hear. The podcast is for you, and we want to serve you best.
The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.